More distractions going on than when I signed off during this Trump administration and the release of the files that many of us talked about years ago, many years ago. No one believed us. And we'll get to that. We'll get to Epstein and very likely the real agenda behind this. But today, I want to kind of go back to the beginning. And a lot of new people, because of this release, are waking up, so to speak, due to the release of the Epstein files forced by Thomas Massie to be released. And, what's so interesting about this to me is, I woke up about 10 years ago, but it is very much, a metaphor and the awakening, because there's many awakenings. There's many layers to this onion, and it's not really what people imagine the awakening process to be, because there are many awakenings. You have more than one, in my opinion. You have a bunch of them. And each one is, so to speak, a step on a pyramidal ladder on your way to finding the actual truth of our reality, not just geopolitically, but beyond that, superphysically, metaphysically. And, with so many people wanting guidance and having something akin to this experience that I had in 2016, it needs to be taken piece by piece, step by step, layer by layer, incrementally and gradually, working your way through paradigm-shattering information and knowledge. Knowledge that's been occulted, knowledge that's been hidden, about both yourself, about the systems of our world, the institutions, the governments, and about the nature of reality itself. And here's where I feel like people that are waking up now due to the Epstein stuff really need, or possibly need, but very likely, almost assuredly need a little bit of guidance. And I'm not saying I'm that guide, but I can give a breakdown of what this experience should look like, because it's not every day you find out that your government, the supposed light of the world of America, is covering up a multi-billion-dollar industrial scale trafficking ring, or some people were involved in it, and that the power elite of the world were involved in this, and it wasn't obviously just one guy, and that this shatters people's, they have this kind of, just like I did, cozy, safe, and contented mentality and beliefs about your world, about your reality, about the countries and their governments that you live within. And we were presented with one set of beliefs, really indoctrination, and most people can never seem to get out of this unless something absolutely dramatic occurs in their life, whether it's traumatic, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's Epstein. Something has to be absolutely, your worldview system shattered. That's what typically will occur. And that's not how it always occurs, but that's one way it can occur. And you can either, ferret around looking for answers, kind of at random, or you can throw yourself in there without the necessary skills to try to navigate, say, the Epstein files, or come up with your own ideas about what all that really means, without any experience in trying to wade your way through the BS, the indoctrination, the social engineering, the programming, social programming that's been with us, if you're like me, a millennial, since birth, period. And even with our parents, the baby boomers, that's, the serious programming started back then. And anyone that's a millennial knows what I'm talking about if they've started to wake up. And they start to notice things that they didn't notice before. So, okay, there are many, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, but this comes from experience of knocking down the layers and walls of previous worldview systems, shattering them one after another for years to get to the occulted truths of our reality. And everything has to be taken one step at a time. And I didn't exactly do that. And, I suffered for that. I tried to do it all in like 2 years. And kind of went a little crazy, but that was a long time ago. That's what can happen if you try to go too fast. So, what occurs, like it did for me, was you sort of bought the hook, line, and sinker historical narrative, the institutional narrative, the materialistic narrative about, say you're an American, about America, and everything that goes with that. You feel patriotic, you supported the war on terror, you supported all these different things, all these different institutions. Yet, it wasn't as cemented as you might have thought it was in your own mind. Because I was a history major. I got my bachelor's in history. And, I was presented one side, and, I studied a lot of ancient and old history, going back several thousands of years up to the present. That was more my focus. And when you go back, you see that our time period is quite unique, if you believe their narratives that you've been told from birth. That, like, all the bad guys are out there. America is this shining beacon of hope and freedom. You feel very patriotic. You think the good guys won in World War I and World War II, and that, we're like the civilizational peak of morality, integrity, and evolution as a country, and that our founding fathers saw to it that this would occur. And if you look at the rest of history, and people kind of feel this way in Europe too, I guess, but they have their supposed constitutional republics over there. But in other places and in every other time period, it's not the case. It's just absolutely not the case whatsoever. The governments were open authoritarians, open totalitarians, open monarchies. Might is right, rule by force, rule by false flags and psychological operations to a degree. I mean, it was quite cut and dry. They were not trying to be sophisticated about the fact that the elite and the aristocracy of whatever time period and whatever nation ruled with an iron fist, and there was no doubts about who was in charge, and that you didn't have any rights, and that you didn't have a say. You were the lower classes, and you just simply didn't. And it was understood. It was the order of things. It was the hierarchy of being. And then we come all the way up to our period. So what I'm saying when I say this is that in the historical records, what the majority of the time and the majority of the cases of nations existing, and what the experience was in all those different time periods and nations going back 7,000 years, was an upper oligarchical class running everything, running industry, running all the businesses, running all the governments, whether through a king or through an aristocratic Senate majority like in Rome. But it was always class-based. It was always the haves in terms of the upper crust ruling over the masses. There was no doubt. There was no question. Nobody saw it any other way. It was obvious. It was transparent. It was open. And that is pretty much the experience in every time period, in every country, for the most part, throughout all of history. Until after the American Revolution. And So when I say this, my point is that to think that somehow we've escaped this pretty much human constant, historical constant of governments seeking to control, seeking to dominate, seeking to run everything through an upper elite class, through an oligarchy, is very small. The chances are very slim. And we may have had it for a short time, maybe 100 years, I don't know. But the fact is, this was not the norm. This was not the historical norm whatsoever. It was actually absolutely, completely unique and almost never happened anywhere else. And we've been fed this idea, certainly I know I was, that we'd won the day. America was, the great nation, the savior of lives, the protector of the innocent, the generator of wealth, the peak of civilization. And so was Europe, and maybe specifically England. And that the Anglo-American pact had saved the world and could do nothing but good, and was doing good. Don't let your eyes deceive you. We are the good guys. And like most people, I fell for that hook, line, and sinker. I was in ninth grade when 9/11 happened, and you catch my drift. I believed everything. Yet, simply because the historical norm was not what I've been taught. The historical norm was what I was taught, was that this doesn't ever happen. Countries are always run by oligarchs. Governments are always like this. They always seek more power. They always seek to make empires. And to think that they wouldn't do so, and that checks and balances are going to hold in place, is not the norm. So you were taught that in history, as a history major. Yet then you were simultaneously supposed to believe that somehow we bypassed that. We did it. We are the great ones. The American Revolution succeeded and has continued to succeed. And nothing has gone awry whatsoever, even though things may appear to be the opposite of this fact. And don't let your eyes deceive you, they would say. Clearly we're the good guys. We're fighting for freedom. We're just, helping those people in the Middle East, have better lives, and, we're sending aid to everybody, blah, blah, blah. And the fact is, you were taught both. One is truth. Yes, most of history is not run by nice people. It's run by a plutocracy everywhere for thousands of years. And plutocracy is like an aristocracy, but with simply the wealthy elite, not necessarily having it based on lineage, but like on wealth and power specifically. And that's the norm. So yeah, that was correct. But then the idea that somehow they didn't come back and re-infiltrate America after the Industrial Revolution, when all these these massive amounts of wealth generating empires were created through the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Anglo-American elite in general, everywhere from the Boer War in South Africa to an American industry and banking and finance and steel magnates and robber barons, and that somehow, even though all that occurred, that we kept it all in check. Then that they're not running things, that the elite are not in control, that the government is running exactly as it seems to be and as intended, and the people you think are in charge are in charge. So okay, that's one step in the awakening process right there, is to acknowledge all this, to realize that the ideas that you believe, one, were taught to you, and you were indoctrinated into them through the school system, the Prussian educational school system implemented by John Dewey and the Rockefellers. Not to mention the medical system. They also created the Rockefeller medical system, basically allopathic medicine going back 115 years, essentially, to 1910, with the Flexner Report. Maybe it's 1911. Either way, point being, there are many layers to this onion of the awakening. And all too often, people that start to wake up find a new layer, a little bit beyond their reality. What you could call a normie, mainstream, I believed what I was told growing up, I believed the narratives, and everything is as it seems, belief system, worldview system. And then they start to think things seem a little weird with certain things like Epstein. And so they start pushing through the veil, one of the veils. And there are many, many veils to the reality that we are actually living in. And the first wall to shatter in your old worldview system is that previous concept that history is as it seems and as it's told, and as an American that, we're the good guys. And, of course, the right people wrote the histories of all this, and there's nothing to hide. That there's maybe just a little bit of corruption, but really it's okay. It's not as bad as people think it is. But, in general, the system's kind of working. Maybe some weird people have got in there, like in the last 10 years, like Trump. But, it's not, it's, essentially what you're led to believe, that we have a democracy and it runs the way we think it runs. And that's the first wall. You break that wall down. You take a hammer and a chisel and you just knock it down. What's behind that? Well, that wall behind that is the worldview system that maybe things are a lot more corrupt than we thought they were. That maybe the post-World War II era engineered a surveillance and intelligence and military-industrial intelligence complex state that never really gave back their power, and largely political figures, politicians, presidents, are figureheads. And the two parties work together. But just to make money and power. Just to allocate, and they're really working for these elite families that run America and have been running America for quite a long time. Some of them, like the DuPonts, potentially stretch back all the way to the American Revolution. Others, like the Rockefellers, only to the Industrial Revolution. Either way, the elite ruling plutocrats of America run this country, run the government through a hidden hand, and government is largely for show. See, now that's another layer. So now you've had another layer. That's another part of the onion. So you peel back the first and you get to that. Well, most people would be like, well, there can't possibly be any more. I mean, that's what waking up means. I mean, capitalism is running America, not democracy. No, it's way worse. It's way worse than that. And it goes far beyond simply America. So then there's more layers to break through. And part of the problem most people run into is the fact that, as a great man once said named Mark Passio, who I've met, said, to get to real knowledge, it's like a spectrum. Here's neutral. Here's knowledge. And then what's over here? Negative knowledge. Negative knowledge. Knowledge that is completely erroneous and incorrect. So, you get a line. Here's the marker. This is 0, meaning you don't have any knowledge at all. Over here's knowledge. Back here's negative knowledge, past the 0. Negative knowledge. Knowledge that is totally erroneous and must be unlearned to reach 0. To reach no knowledge. There's lots to unlearn to reach no knowledge. And then, like a newborn child, then you start at 0 after unlearning everything and going that way towards true knowledge. But there's so much to unlearn and so much attachment by people to those paradigms and institutional frameworks of thinking and belief systems and worldviews that it's not only scary or terrifying, but just simply put, extremely uncomfortable, apparently, to a lot of people. It wasn't for me, for some reason, to realize that lots of prior understanding of the world was based on error, complete error, or deliberate deception by someone or something, some institution, or some intelligence apparatus in operation on a population-wide scale. That is not fun for most people for some reason. I thoroughly enjoyed it myself, but it made much more sense to me as someone who studied the historical record going way back and into history and then coming forward, that the norm was to actually do exactly what's occurring in our world, which is to control the population, to manipulate the population, and to doing what the elites and the ruling class want them to do, and they simply didn't have the means to do that before. After 1900, after the psychological age, and the post-industrial age begins, they have the means, the money, the power, the motivation, and the right conflicts and situations to implement large-scale indoctrination, social engineering, and population programming systems. And not only that, experiments. And to think that any other time in history, they would have used that, like a Caesar or a king, no matter who they were. They had those abilities to pull that off, like a pharaoh, a king, an emperor, at any time period. You would not hesitate to say they would utilize that power and that ability immediately to work one over in their population. You wouldn't hesitate to say that with a king or an emperor or, the aristocratic classes of ancient Rome or whoever. Doesn't matter. Everyone knows that most likely if they thought about it, they wouldn't hesitate. So, the idea that our governments wouldn't hesitate, where's the basis in history for the fact that anyone would resist doing that if they had the chance and they had the means and they were in control of those institutions that are capable of doing this? Well, there isn't one. They've never had that ability, and they always wanted it as a ruling class. So the idea that they wouldn't utilize it on you is absurd and ludicrous, and the statistics are almost zero as far as the historical record goes of anyone who wouldn't do that if they had the means to pull that off. Utilize the study of psychology and crowd control and mass consciousness experiments. So, that being said, that is another layer. That's the next layer. The layer that's starting to get a little darker. It gets a little darker every layer that you knock down. And you bring in a willingness to potentially accept that things could be that dark. Things could be a truthfully really wild scenario compared to your previous normie belief systems. And it takes a true, honestly, I'm not going to call it bravery, just a willingness to know the truth no matter the cost. No matter how dark it is. No matter what the truth will reveal. That you simply want that information. Regardless of the cost to yourself. Meaning your mental, emotional contentment and stability. Not like you're going to lose your mind. But you're not going to leave the world the same once this occurs. And once you accept that it's occurring, because it is occurring, it's a fact, it changes you. And either you will feel a self-righteous rage and indignation at the audacity of the power elite to do this to the human race, their own populations and citizen bodies. Or you want to take that blue pill and go right back to sleep. And first of all, once you get deep enough, you've knocked multiple layers down, that chance of going back to sleep becomes basically impossible, and you lose it. You might be able to do it with the first layer or two. After that, There's no going back. The red pill has been taken, and you are now trudging down the layers into the caverns of occulted truth and the nature of reality itself, no matter the cost. Because there's no turning back at that point. The problem is, and part of the reason I'm making this video, is what I want to warn people about, no matter when they woke up. There was something inherent about my own mentality when I started all this, is that anything could be a deception. Anything. 100% at the time. Certainly anything current. Anything from governments, anything from... until I vetted somebody, anyone could be working for these elites. Kind of like they live. And so, when I encountered people that were sharing information about a grand conspiracy, whichever part of it they're referring to, I always used myself as the vetter. I didn't just rely on these individuals, whether it's Alex Jones, Michael Tessarian, Jordan Maxwell, any truther that you can imagine, except for maybe Mark Pass, who I know is the real deal, and David Icke. Even actually, in the beginning, David Icke, I thought was totally in on it, because there's no way they would allow someone to speak at these mass, crowds and stadiums. Well, no, he's not in on it at all. But that's how suspicious I was when I woke up 10 years ago. Almost 10 years ago. It was April of 2016. And it's not the idea of being paranoid. It's that you must never think you may have completely, certainly in the beginning, come to the new truth after just a little bit of work. It takes a lot of work. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes breaking down many layers and unraveling the onion down to so many layers to really arrive at any real truths. And here's the thing. This is what I'm talking about. If you're the elite and you know that's, there's a portion of the population that's going to wake up at some point, for whatever reason in this day and age, or they're resistant to social engineering and programming, and they might start asking questions. What are you going to do? Just try to think like they do. Try to think like, I don't know, the director of the CIA. It's not hard. At least that wasn't in my mind. Because it gets a lot darker than just the director of the CIA later on. But what would you do if you wanted to make sure this wouldn't occur? Sorry, not that it would occur. That when it occurs, what are you going to do about these people that wake up in whatever form and on whatever stage of the worldview destruction of their old understanding that they're at? Because there's many, and from whichever angle you come from it at, because everyone has different experiences. It might be something unique to them or their life situation or their unique belief system that they grew up with that they started to question and that led them into this bigger one. What would you do as say the director of the CIA or whoever? Well, you would set up not only false operatives to capture this new awakened audience, you'd set up false conceptual frameworks for them to fall into and think, now I've got it. That's the deepest layer. That's the end. There's no more. I've found it. And that's it. This is what they were hiding. Say just a couple steps in. This is what they were hiding. It's the Illuminati. It's simply the Freemasons. It's just the Jesuits. It's the Catholic Church. It's those over in the Middle East, starting, with the letter J at the beginning of their name. You know what I'm talking about. It's the elite capitalists. It's the bankers. And each one of these will be like a paradigm that you could generate narrative, conceptual framework information on, make videos on yourself as a CIA operative, basically, I would say, and you would spin out all this pseudo-truthful, pseudo-fictional narrative BS to capture awakening minds. Or you get people to think it's simplistic and hone in on a singular group, like, say, the Freemasons or the Jesuits. And that's it. They're the ones in charge. That's all there is. They're the ones controlling everything, which is obviously too simplistic, which is why I have a problem with people like whoever it is, Nick Fuentes, or, various other Main Street podcasters who are supposedly alternative, but, they picked their one guy, their one group that's doing everything, and they're wrong. And now you may go through each one of these stages, just like I did, where in the beginning, say in 2016, there were multiple times when I'm like, oh my God, it's just that group. Oh my God, no, now it's this group. Oh my God, maybe it's just those two groups. And then, but you don't ever stop. You keep adding in. Now you're rebuilding your worldview concept into like a tapestry of knowledge and information. Once you've decided to throw out everything else and start at zero, you start to run into these psyops or deliberately engineered conceptual frameworks in a tunnel vision-like fashion. That is very convenient and very simple, and to latch onto, and you'll want to, because now you're adrift in a world where you thought you knew what was going on, and now you don't. So what does the mind want to do at that point? It wants to latch on to some answer, to some easy, quickly found answer to everything. Some people will be like, well, that's all just ridiculous. There's no conspiracies here. The world is exactly the same, so you're just crazy. We're not talking about that type of thing, that type of answer. The first thing you're going to do, or what you're going to want to do, maybe it's subconscious, is find a simple answer. It's the Freemasons. They're doing all of it. It's just them, and that's it. They're running everything. And, that's okay to start, in the beginning, to start with that. Layer. But then the point being, you don't stop. You don't stay fixated or stuck in one field of information that leads you down a rabbit hole. You check every rabbit hole. You check all the fields. You check medicine. You check finance. You check banking. You check intelligence. You check social networking. You check think tanks, foundations, NGOs, which are non-government organizations, international institutions like the World Economic Forum. You check everything, or the Club of Rome. You don't stay stuck on any one. You can't just the Council of Foreign Relations runs everything. Most people don't even know what the heck that thing is. I didn't, and I was a history major, and I definitely should have known what the Council of Foreign Relations was, and I should have been taught about it in college and in high school. I went to good schools. Never really heard of them. And they run our entire foreign policy in a very interesting way. And that's the point is, don't get fixated on any one answer. Bring in answers and try to kind of like network them into a constellation of information as you navigate the layers of awakening, as you navigate the layers of corruption and deception from the institutions of our world, if you're an American, or either way. Point being, don't ever rely on any one person. Look at lots of people's information. Don't ever rely on a singular easy answer to sum it all up as what's going on. And don't stop learning. It's one of the main points. I'm still learning. Even though I feel, in some sense, far advanced down the rabbit hole, it doesn't matter. It never ends. Really. So, next I want to talk about a different type of awakening. Like I said, there's many types of awakenings. There's the study of the world as it is into the world that the world that you thought it was and the world that it is, with deception, corruption, think tanks, foundations, institutional frameworks for control, monopolies, medical monopolies, industrial monopolies, financial monopolies, power elite aristocrats running things through their puppet governments. That's all just one style. That's one aspect of the awakening. And so, like I said, there's the first layer and the second layer, and this is like the third layer that I just mentioned. But it goes much deeper than that. And the further if you keep digging, you start to realize that there's something else to awaken to. There's greater awakenings than simply the technocratic power elite, agendas to gain world domination and control through deception and whatever. They're playing the chessboard back and forth against themselves and us. There's a deeper layer than that. There's another awakening, one that is often missed. And the other thing about people that wake up is they tend to fixate, besides on, say, fixate on an organization, they fixate on a concept, where then they don't study other concepts because they think this is the key to fixing our world. Whether it's free energy, whether it's alien disclosure, whether it's fixing the monetary system, whether it's getting control of the banking system again, whether it's restoring the republic. If you're, say, an independent political thinker. It's, or it's ancient aliens. It's ancient aliens. Or, it's the New Age, the New Age spiritual concepts. There's so many, it's hard to remember them all. Flat Earth, and then there's Flat Earth, versus Hollow Earth, versus Globular Earth, versus, NASA's deceiving everyone. Each one of these is like a field of study. Free energy, banking and financial corruption, and how the monetary system works, government corruption and political theater, ancient origin stories like ancient aliens, alternative spirituality, social engineering things. Will include psychological warfare, stopping that. Then there's many more. Each one of these typically becomes a singular field for an individual to become a part of. Like, they join that group. Flat Earth as well. That was an amazing psyop. Each one of these becomes the singular focus is the problem in all of these things. And you know what the one thing I didn't mention? What's the one thing missing from this list of fields? One that affects all the fields. Occultism, the study of the ancient mystery schools, their understanding of natural law, superphysical laws of reality that transcend time and space, the study of ancient occult metaphysics, simply the study of what I would call esoteric studies, the studies of the esoteric traditions like Hermeticism, alchemy, Rosicrucianism, theosophy, anthroposophy, potentially not really, but maybe Freemasonry, and other fields like that totally shift the entire board of everything. So the problem Mark Pastu has always been talking about, and then I've also noticed, is that you have these other layers to the awakening. You start with, like, the world's as it seems, and then you go to, all right, there's more corruption than I thought. Then you go to, all right, it might be like a transnational elite conspiracy for world domination. And then the next layer is, all right, they might be into some weird stuff, like Epstein, and weird rituals. Then they stop. And that's all they can think of. You know why? Whether it's free energy or finance or economics or monetary policy or social engineering or psychological warfare, all those things can all be summed up in a singular concept: materialism. That is only stuff occurring on the plane of effects in the material reality, the materium. That's one awakening, really, with multiple layers to it, actually. That's what I would call that. And the greater awakening that is connected to that one, it's more like the more advanced stage of it, you could say, is the superphysical or metaphysical unveiling of occulted reality. And now this is where a lot of psyops have been generated. They've done a lot of psyops like Flat Earth, Ancient Aliens, and all this, all these different, false information feeding influencers and paradigms that they've funded, like Ancient Aliens, to distract things. And what that does, specifically say something like Ancient Aliens, is it materializes an origin story of mankind. But the point being, all these are just the plane of matter, the materialistic plane of awakening. You can awaken to all that and still miss the real awakening. And a lot of people are waking up and they need guidance. And I had to guide myself, as many others did, if you woke up like 10, 20 years ago. But there were already others out there podcasting, great individuals who were podcasting, who put out information for years, and you could find them. But the last 6 years has really changed the game. And the missing paradigm to a real awakening is the awakening to an expanded, deeper, and more esoteric framework for how you see reality itself, not just Earth and its systems. It goes much further, it goes beyond Earth. And this is where esoteric studies and occultism comes into play. And give me 1 second. Unfortunately, as Mark Passio said many times, there's not a lot of players in this field. And a lot of what's called the truth movement are still stuck in their same paradigms after a decade and a half. And they still think that there is a, so to speak, materialist-based action that will solve everything, whether it's free energy or alien disclosure or whatever, or political, or political one. Get the right person in there. If you're libertarian, what all these things are missing is the higher knowledge of the occult tradition. This is not a dark tradition. Problem being, people that run this world, they are into the dark side of that tradition. They are dark occultists, and they are satanic. Not in the sense that Christians think, but in terms of being the inverse of holy. They simply take the mysteries taught in this tradition and invert them and utilize them for selfish and egotistical and evil purposes, as opposed to for good, for the betterment of humanity, which that was the point of the mystery schools. It was the point of occultism, was to guide the race, to guide the evolution of humanity, to guide us through these layers of information and knowledge stemming back to the beginning of our history. And they've taken that information and they're utilizing all that information of superphysical cosmic laws, the higher dimensions of our own consciousness through our spiritual bodies. And they've taken these occult concepts, they know about the higher planes of reality, and they are utilizing it against the rest of us while simultaneously making people think none of that exists, that's woo-woo, don't look into that, or if you're Christian, that's demonic, don't look into that. But you can look into all the other stuff, the World Economic Forum, transnational elite control, elite corruption, social engineering, psychological warfare. What they don't ever want you to know is that a lot of that is based in the occult itself. And that's how they learned it initially. And then they technologized it. They changed the terminology. But it's the same principles. And they use them against us. So what I'm trying to get across in this video, for anyone that's waking up, or anyone that's already awakened and is on the path, there are many aspects to this path. It starts at a very small scale, like an onion. And every layer you peel back, there's another layer. And then there's another layer beyond that, and there's another layer beyond that. And then you seem to reach a standstill unless you study occultism, unless you study the superphysical reality and what the mystery school traditions have been teaching people for centuries. Without that knowledge, you end up basically at a stalemate of information. And a very sad one, too, because reality will seem absolutely terrible at that point. And you really kind of want to take the blue pill once you realize what's going on. Unless you understand the higher knowledge that's a part of this awakening process, yet is being hidden and definitely distracted from on a massive scale. They put out so many psyops, so many distractions to keep you away from this information. And fortunately for me, I was gifted with a book that started my awakening that was specifically an esoteric encyclopedia by Manly P. Hall called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And that one book started it all for me. And then I actually studied a lot of the superphysical stuff, more, so to speak, woo-woo conspiracies first, and had to backtrack and learn some of the lower knowledge stuff like social engineering, institutional control, studying foundations, non-government organizations, international lead institutions, councils on foreign relations, all that kind of stuff. And then combined all that into a singular framework, realizing that the occult studies that I'd done first absolutely enhanced all that information at the bottom that I did later, almost kind of did later on, 4 years later, during the COVID era. And I did it quickly, but I did it. And then you realize how these are utilizing those same principles from the occult traditions within those institutional frameworks of control, that it's not as simple as you think it is. And they're capturing the mind on the mental plane. They're capturing the emotions on the astral plane. They're creating egregores. They're creating thought forms that generate a repetitive control over the minds of the groups of people that felt that it was generated to influence, and that then they can keep these influential entity thought forms, tulpas, they can regenerate them and kind of do rituals to keep them going, to maintain the influence over those parts of the population that they want to stay in that mental framework of control from the thought form that they generated or program them into. And once the thought form is generated and powerful enough, they can basically maintain it, and then it gains semi-independence, according to the occult tradition, and they can re-influence the ones that generated it, which is the masses that generated it, but they have to manipulate you into generating these thought form entities, tulpas and egregores. But once they do, you're basically under a form of astro-etheric mental mind control by a self-generated interdimensional thought form entity that you can't see, that you don't know is influencing you, but maintains the influence anyway. And they'd know about this. That's really what they're doing. So that's just an example. This video's gone on a little longer than I expected. To those that are waking up from Epstein, do not think you've found the truth. And right away. Look hard. Look long. Look at every system of belief structure that you had prior to that. Analyze them. Study them. Pick them apart to see what else they're lying to you about. If they'd lied to you about that, they'd cover that up. What else are they covering up? It should be your question to that. That should be what you're pondering. And then go after it. the information is out there, but always be aware that they have people out there to capture your attention, redirect it into narratives that they know that you might fall for after waking up, and they can then pigeonhole you into and trap you there, thinking you've found everything. And that's the nature of the game. And there's many layers to doing that to people. Whether it's, unfortunately now, Alex Jones, whether it's ancient aliens, or, alternative spirituality. You break out of institutionalized religion, you go into that, and then there's traps in there. There's false gurus and, people trying to make money on teaching you nonsense and making you pay for it. They may have half-truths and, half erroneous conceptions. Then there's, false origin stories about mankind. There's many of those, and that's another part of the awakening. Then there's, like the hopium drug, where, Trump's going to stop it all, and, there's white hats involved, and they're stopping everything in the background. People have actually all been arrested, and you just don't know it yet, and it's all over, and QAnon, and then there's others, and there's flat Earth, and, total nonsense, totally made up completely, and paradigms for you to totally lose yourself in and never break out again, and capture your attention permanently. And instead, stay on the path. Never think that the path is going to end. You may really get pretty down the rabbit hole, very far down, and have a very well conceived, knowledgeable understanding of what is going on. And a great person as an introduction to this, who gives it in very good layman's terms, is David Icke. But you can move beyond David Icke. You can go into what he's talking about yourself through studying the occult traditions like Theosophy and Anthroposophy and Rosicrucianism. I'm not saying go join these organizations. I'm saying go read their books. Go study their texts. And don't get the light versions of them. Doesn't mean you have to become one of those people, but study what their worldview system and universe view system is, and how expanded it is, and their metaphysical conceptions. And just always remember that the rabbit hole doesn't end. There's always more to know. There's always another layer that someone else might have that you don't have yet, whether it's on technocracy, transhumanism, the occult, or whatever else. And that's the main thing. That's the main thing, is to, as you wake up, realize it's a long process, and that's not going to be a quick. It's not going to go quickly. You have to navigate the waters. There are many layers of deception, in most fields of study and knowledge and research of your previous worldview, and that's just how it goes. And it can be very fun in a certain sense, and very dark and depressing in another sense. And that's where part of the esoteric studies comes in, because what they've hidden about you in our universe, what they've kept hidden, is beautiful. What the occult tradition says about humanity and our universe and our place in it, and the different aspects of our being and the different aspects of the universe's being and planes of existence, is very, very uplifting, inspirational, and truly beautiful in its depth. And it really helps to balance out the negative stuff that you will find out about your world, like Epstein. And, that's all I got to say on that. So, I hope you'll have a wonderful awakening process, and I'll do some more videos on this soon. Never forget that the truth may be out there, but there are countless layers of control between you and that truth, and that you have to continually peel them back to get there. And in the beginning, never think you've gotten there with just a couple layers. And that's the main point of this video, is that there's that many layers, and they have come up with ways to deceive you to get through those layers or to get stuck in one. So my name is Sam Robinson. I'm the Gnostic Syncretist. And please like and share this around. Thank you for joining us today.